Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. And so Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Clarity from Chaos. Tonight, we're going to tackle the ongoing political disinformation once again. And so I'm sure you're wondering which disinformation I'm talking about, since there probably isn't anything right now that we can trust coming out of our government. But we're going to continue to discuss the lie, which is COVID-19, with our guest, Leslie Manookian. Leslie is the president and founder of the Health Freedom Defense Fund. She is also the creator and producer of the documentary, The Greater Good, which has won many awards. Welcome to the show, Leslie.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here with you tonight.
So let's start out with the ongoing thing that Mr. Rogan challenged Dr. Peter Hotz with the debate with RFK Jr., because I find that just after reading the information around the good doctor, I just found it appalling.
It is appalling. If I may, just respectfully, it's Hotez, just so you know.
Hotez, okay.
Yeah, Peter Hotez.
Okay.
I've had plenty of experience with him, so I'm unfortunately well aware of how to say his name.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, essentially for your listeners who don't know, what happened is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went on to Joe Rogan and had a wide-ranging conversation about the misinformation that's being peddled by the federal government and by health authorities in this country and medical authorities. We're not talking about only the government, but also from, other organizations, which I won't name, but you can just think about the big medical organizations and associations in this country. And many of them, including doctors' organizations, were actually forcing doctors to stick to the party line or risk losing their jobs. The government was peddling all this information. And what happened was RFK went on to Rogan and started talking about that. But he also talked about what his issues are with just regular vaccines, not only the COVID vaccine, but all vaccines. And, he's been accused by Peter Hotez and all these others of spreading misinformation. But the truth is that everything that he said is fact-based. And I know this because I made a documentary film on it, and his claims are accurate. And I mean, I think if there's one inaccuracy, it's that every vaccine hasn't been studied against a placebo, but most of them have not.
Right.
But basically what happened was a result of it was this. I mean, I thought that the interview that he did with Rogan was absolutely fantastic. I mean, I was just reveling in it because very rarely do we ever get the opportunity to actually share this perspective with a large audience, because we are silenced by these groups. And I mean, I've been censored and silenced for more than a decade, for like 15 years or so, having made the movie. And so what happened was Rogan was just sitting there fact checking him and asking him questions and putting stuff up on the screen. And in the aftermath of that, Dr. Peter Hotez, who's a vaccine developer and patent holder, who earns a sizable amount from the vaccine industry and who's has a role at Baylor University, he called out Rogan for allowing Kennedy to be on his show and said, that he was basically, he linked to a Vice article, I think it was. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it was a Vice article that smeared RFK. And Rogan said, "Oh, come on. If you disagree with him, come on my show. I'll give $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you'll come on and debate Kennedy live. Kennedy's a reasonable guy." And what did Hotez do? He first of all refused. And then he's like, I'm a scientist. I don't debate. What is science supposed to be about? It's supposed to be about debate. But then what ended up happening is that last I checked, the kitty was up to over $2.6 million. So all these other people have joined in and said that they will donate. They will contribute, and it's over $2.6 million if Hotez will come in. I think they even said, or someone of his choosing will come on to the Joe Rogan show and debate RFK on all of these statements that he's made. And the kinds of things he stated, David, are that vaccines aren't properly studied against placebos, that the ingredient thimerosal has not been properly studied and is linked to all sorts of neurological complications in children, which is a fact. All sorts of things like this. And, all of this stuff is actually provably true.
Right. Well, he talked about the ivermectin. He talked about the hydroxychloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine, yeah.
Hydroxychloroquine, all of those issues which have been proven to be, a good alternative for what the vaccinations did. And I guess even Mr. Hotez even wrote an article about its efficacy in, I believe, 2007. So I find the whole thing pretty disingenuous. On top of the fact that he has this huge Big Pharma connection.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, but there's something else that's really important for people to understand, and that is that this guy, Dr. Peter Hotez, is one of the primary vaccine apologists wheeled out in order to have these conversations, basically to just say everything's peachy, there are no problems, and we shouldn't be concerned about anything. I've debated him in a sort of debate, a pseudo debate on NPR. And he is a, deep, deep ties to the pharmaceutical industry, to the vaccine industry, just like Dr. Paul Offit has. And what's really fascinating is that in 2020, in the early days of the COVID crisis, Hotez was actually cautioning in Congress, in hearings, cautioning against a rush to put out the COVID shots. He was saying, and the reason he was doing that was because they have actually tried to study vaccines against, I'm totally spacing on the term now. Against coronaviruses. There's 7 different coronaviruses. And for years, for decades, they've been trying to find a vaccine for coronaviruses. And you know what? They've never been able to, because the clinical trials have always shown that they were super dangerous, like children dying on the clinical trials, severe injury and death. And so they've always stepped back and said, we can't move forward with this. And so what's really interesting is Hotez is early on in the crisis testifying in front of Congress that we should not be rushing to vaccinate with these shots, and that we should really be exercising caution, because history has taught us that these are highly dangerous products. And for some reason, there's a real concern with coronavirus vaccines. And then he just completely flips. And now he's like the biggest advocate, and he's against all of the treatments, off-label treatments like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. It's like somebody called him up and said, "Hey, buddy, you're reading from the wrong script. Here's the new one." It's so blatant.
Wow. And then we shift gears and we go with the CDC, and they're not having diagnostic codes for showing cause of death, which again is just all part of the big lie.
Yeah. Well, it's even worse than that, David, because what they did was early on is CDC actually instructed coroners and doctors, when you are completing a death certificate, it's always been that the primary cause of death is listed first. And if you have been, if you're in stage 4 cancer, that's the primary cause of death. That's number 1. That goes in the first line. But when the COVID crisis began, they changed that, and they said to list COVID first. So someone had stage 4 lung cancer, someone was, on a motorcycle and crashed. That was secondary to a test, even if it was post-mortem, that was positive for COVID. This is just insanity, right? And then on top of that, what they did was, so there was this incredible, I can go into it if you want to, but basically that's what happened. So they started out with deviating from years and years of guidance. I think it was nearly 20 years of guidance about how to complete a death certificate early on in the COVID crisis. They started telling physicians and coroners to use a different methodology than always used in the past. And then what happened in the more recent years is that they actually, in individual states, were not coding properly. And I can unpack that if you'd like.
Sure. Go ahead.
So basically, there's a researcher I know. His name is John Bowden, and he's done amazing work um, investigating and really, like, literally combing through the records in the state of Massachusetts, where he has a lawsuit against them for falsifying the COVID statistics. And in Minnesota as well, he's been investigating there. And what he found was that the state of Minnesota was not adhering to normal practices. In fact, what they were doing is if a person died after a COVID vaccine, so within a short period of time, but the physician did not write on the death certificate the coding that says after an immunization or virus, it was like connected to a virus or something like that. So there's two specific codes that connect it to a vaccination. If they didn't write that down and they just wrote in their notes 10 hours after a vaccination, after the COVID shot, CDC changed it. CDC
Oh,
would either manually or through their algorithm override the doctor's notes and not list the COVID shot as the cause of death. Okay, there were 9 cases in the state of Minnesota that they evaluated, and in 7 of them, one of them was like 10 hours after the shot. Another one was close after the shot as well. Those were not listed as COVID vaccine deaths. They were listed as COVID deaths.
oh, that's great.
How malicious and disingenuous is that? And what happened was, in the 2 cases where they were listed appropriately after the shot, or that they were caused by the shot, the actual coding was correct. So what's CDC going to do if the doctor has actually gone to the pains of writing the proper code on there? They'd have to rewrite the entire death certificate, and they didn't do that. So in there are 2 cases where they did allow it to show cause of death was the shot, but in 7 of the 9 cases where the actual code wasn't listed, CDC didn't go and complete it properly and input the correct code. They overwrote it, and they let people believe that the cause of death was COVID, even though in one of the cases, as I said, the shot was administered 10 hours before, and the person had had COVID months before, but a shot 10 hours before dying. And I believe there was one case with a heart attack right, soon after the shot. And this is just outrageous. And these people are our health officials. These are the people who are supposed to be protecting our health, guiding public policy, advising our policymakers and our public representatives. They are literally lying to you, distorting the data, and deceiving people about what was really going on.
So when's it going to stop, Leslie? It just keeps going. It keeps going and going, and it doesn't seem to reach a conclusion. It's kind of like, they just want more and more out of this. And I know it's being driven by Big Pharma and all the people that Big Pharma has their tentacles into. But at some point, it's got to be enough, I would think.
Well, I think that there's several reasons for that. First of all, let me just add to what I was saying earlier, that all of these statistics are being manipulated, but all the cases and the deaths are being attributed to COVID on the basis, or the shot on the basis of a test. And it's not even a test. The PCR is actually not a diagnostic test or diagnostic tool. It is a method for taking genetic material and amplifying it so that scientists can play with it in a laboratory. But it was used. And I just read recently that in New York, there was something that was presented that showed that up to 90%, no, the New York Times published this, potentially 90% of the cases, I think it was cases, it might have been deaths, but 90% of them, no, it was cases, 90% of them did not have enough viral load to even be infectious. So this is just it was something I was saying to our local officials early on that this PCR test, they were calling it, was being completely misused in order to create fear so that people would relinquish their rights and freedoms. I fully believe that. So when is it going to end? Well, I think there's many components of this. First of all, I don't want it to end yet. And when I say it, what I mean is the debate and the dialogue. It is imperative that the people who've been trying to expose the truth, like myself, since the very beginning,
Hmm.
continue pushing until there's accountability.
Right.
Because absent accountability, there's every incentive to do it again. There has to be accountability, right?
Yeah, I would agree, but I don't know, given our legal system and the stuff that we're seeing today, that we're going to reach a point of that accountability, you know?
Well, maybe we won't, but let's not give up yet.
Oh, I'm not
So,
giving up. I'm just stating that it's going to
yeah,
be a long road.
very much so. But listen, there are many groups like the Brownstone Institute, of which I'm a member, and I've spoken at their events, who are doing fantastic work exposing the lies and the malfeasance of these government agencies. So it's very, very important that groups like that and the independent substackers and others keep writing and exposing this stuff.
Right.
And I think that's going to happen. So that's one component that's important. But then you've got this other component, which is a much bigger issue. And this is where, when will it ever end? Well, for years and years before they ever came up with these modified RNA shots, there were 200 to 300 vaccines in the pipeline to bring to market. Now, why is the pharmaceutical industry so intent on bringing vaccines to the market? A couple of reasons. First of all, in the United States, they have no liability for vaccines that are added to the children's schedule. In 1986, Congress passed, and then Ronald Reagan signed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. And that act implemented a liability shield, financial and legal liability shield for the pharmaceutical industry for any vaccine that's added to the children's schedule. So they have every incentive to get every vaccine on the children's schedule, which also explains why they were pushing this on children when children were at statistically zero risk. Okay, because they know that they've got a liability shield. So, I used to work in finance. I worked on Wall Street, and I can't imagine being able to, I was a portfolio manager. Can you imagine if I could just sell my portfolio and make all sorts of claims and things, and there was no liability? I mean, talk about a business model anybody would dream of.
Yeah,
Only
I
the
mean, something with zero risk, right? Yeah,
and only the pharmaceutical industry enjoys it. So
right.
that's one thing. But the other thing is that drugs treat sick people. So somebody may have psoriasis, or they may have high blood pressure or something like that. Vaccines treat potentially the entire population if they can convince you that you need it.
Right.
So you have a liability-free product that's the addressable market is the whole globe potentially. And then you have the unbelievable benefit of if they can scare you enough, the government will mandate it and push it on you and purchase them and give them to people. So you've got this, truly insane business model. No one would ever think that this is appropriate. It's certainly not a capitalist business model. This is a socialist business model. You've got government pushing a product, purchasing a product, in some cases mandating a product that they provide a liability shield for, and for which the manufacturer has no accountability. So what incentive do they ever have, the manufacturer, to actually make a safer product? None. So it's just this crazy situation. And the whole reason I'm unpacking this for you is because given that backdrop, the pharmaceutical industry has been moving into what's more of an ex-growth position for the last 5 to 10 years. But you know what? The industry has been reinvigorated now with the prospect of vaccinations, in particular mRNA shots. And they think these modified RNA shots that they will be able to give them to you for anything that they can possibly imagine.
Well, I don't think the public trust is going to. Well, I say that kind of, tongue in cheek. I would think that public trust would not allow that, but it depends on the public relations campaign they throw out there, I guess.
It also depends on how much they frighten people, right?
Right.
There's,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, you look back at generally speaking, when we have seen our rights and freedoms reduced, it's been under the guise of some kind of safety.
Yeah.
Always
Yeah.
been something about safety, whether it's terrorism or a
Yeah.
health scare or what. And then what happens is those rights never come back. Once they're relinquished, they're gone pretty
Yep.
much for good.
Yep.
And so my guess is that we can expect more of these kinds of crises so that they can continue this. And we're hearing about them already. They're talking about, if you pay attention to the media, they're talking about, oh, is the next pandemic around the corner? Could it be MERS? Could it be hantavirus? Could it be Ebola? Could it be? They're constantly talking about these different things that it could possibly be. And then on top of that, you've got another aspect of that, which is that the Western governments are actually actively attempting to transfer their sovereignty to the World Health Organization and the United Nations so that in the event of any kind of an emergency, public health or otherwise, we've actually changed the language so it's not just a public health emergency, but
Right.
any emergency, the World Health Organization could usurp national sovereignty. So they'll be able to monitor what's happening. They'll be able to say, oh, we're monitoring whether or not there's an emergency. They can then come into a local area. So they could come into Idaho, where I live, and say, there's an emergency here. And we are evaluating whether there's an emergency. We are now going to tell you that there is an emergency. And then we're actually going to dictate what the response will be and what the people have to do in order to address the emergency. Meaning they could order everyone to take a shot or do something else. And they
Right.
have zero accountability to us.
Well, that's just great. Where can people go out and find your website, Leslie, so that they can become A, more aware, and B, help in the fight?
Yeah, it's so very, very important because, listen, we can all stand up and we can all say no. We can all not comply and do these things. But what Health Freedom Defense Fund does is we file lawsuits. We stopped the federal travel mask mandate. So you don't have to wear a mask on an airplane anymore because of the lawsuit that we filed challenging the Biden administration's
Right.
travel mask mandate. And I'm making that point because those lawsuits are really important and they're expensive. So if you do want to support us, we're super, super grateful to you for doing that. You can find us at healthfreedomdefense.org. You can become a member there for $10. You can join our newsletter that we send out once every 2 weeks or so for free. And you can donate there. There's a donate button, and you can actually donate to specific individual litigation if you choose. And we've got some very, very important cases that continue. One against the Los Angeles Unified School District, which to this day has a vaccine mandate in place. Isn't that incredible, David?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is incredible, and it's sad that that's still ongoing. And I just heard reports about how far the kids are behind in reading and math due to the lockdown, and nobody's talking about how they're going to recover those 2 years and come back up to the place where they're supposed to be at this particular point.
Yeah,
So and the teachers union are just as complicit as all the rest of them in this.
yeah, very much so. I do not have I've heard this, and I believe it's provable that the United Teachers Union of Los Angeles met with Anthony Fauci the night before the Los Angeles Unified School District shut down, and they were not actually working on behalf of their union members. They were complicit in the lockdowns and pushing all the narratives, and had no problem telling people, if you don't comply with the vaccine mandate, you're going to have to find a new job. That's what they were telling staff.
Wow, that's
Yeah. So
amazing.
anyway, so we've got that, and we've got several other important lawsuits. We have something that we're working on as well that will be, I think, a big, very, very high impact lawsuit. There's so many things that we're doing, and we're super grateful for you having me on the show, and also for anybody who wants to donate to support our work.
Well, it's been terrific having you on the show. And again, we're talking to Leslie Manookian, who's the president and founder of the Health Freedom Defense Fund. And go out to her website, join if you feel so compelled. But I'm telling you, she's leading the good fight, and she could use all the help that she can get. So again, Leslie, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate you having me on.
You bet.